Fantastic. Thank you, Marissa. And thanks to everyone for joining. It's good to see such a big group here today. I think the goal of today is to get you excited about AI for this particular use case. We're going to be talking a lot about data analysis. We've got some poll results coming through here. So I will kind of read through those as we get started, and we'll use that as a way to help guide the conversation today. So looks like a good portion of folks are familiar with ChatGPT, and some have also used Perplexity, Gemini, and Claude. In terms of how often they're being used, weekly seems to be the most frequently selected option here. A couple of nevers and no daily so far, which is great. Hopefully, one of the goals of this is to get you more comfortable with these systems and starting to think about how you could incorporate them into daily workflows. And then in terms of comfortability, it looks like we have a lot of folks who are sitting kind of at the middle of the road, which is awesome. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get us started today. I'm going to introduce kind of the session and provide an introduction to data analysis, some of the basics and some of the things to keep in mind as you start to use these tools for data analysis. And then we'll get into some interactive use cases in a section that Mike will lead, and we'll actually get to start to try to play around with some of these tools. So I will go ahead and share my screen here. And is everybody able to see the slides? All right, great. So the first section of this talk, as I noted, is kind of an introduction to data analysis with generative AI. So I wanted to pull up a slide that I had showed during the last presentations, the first session of this AI summer series, to highlight AI models have evolved from kind of these static systems that only had access to training data to now systems where these models have reasoning capabilities and can actually start to orchestrate actions on a user's behalf. And this is an extremely accelerated um, timeline. And just want to highlight that, the AI you use today is going to be the worst AI you ever use, because it's going to continue to improve and they're going to continue to incorporate new features and functionality into these tools. So most of the tools and methods that we'll talk about today are going to be using some of these more advanced systems that have launched within the past year and a half, really, since late 2023 into 2024. And just to highlight that we're only going to scratch the surface today as part of this conversation. And we're not really going to get into any of the super advanced topics on, agents and multi-agent cooperation, but we will discuss some of those terms as we move through this. So what can AI do when you're looking at data as a part of economic development? Well, you can think about a full spectrum of tasks, and these are highly generic tasks that are highlighted on this particular graphic. But you can think about AI in kind of each particular section of use cases throughout the course of a workflow where you're thinking about analyzing existing information all the way through to strategic planning. So maybe you're just searching the web. Maybe you are uploading some data and you want to analyze that data. Perfectly good use case there. Maybe you want to synthesize some data. So you have multiple data sources. You want to use a model to take that information, bring it together, and pull some insights from that data. A step beyond that, you can take some of those insights and learnings from your data and analysis and actually start to do some what if scenarios with these tools. And then with those what if scenarios, you might be able to kind of use the tools as a platform to brainstorm about some of the challenges and opportunities that exist related to the particular challenge that you're facing or the initiative that you're working on. And then at the end of the spectrum, you can take all of this information that you've accumulated over all of these steps and start to think about how to develop a strategic plan with it. So, how do you do that? And what is the tool that you're going to use in order to do something like that? So, this is an eye chart. There's a lot of information here, but we'll walk through it so that hopefully it's broken down very nicely for you. So, on the left, you see kind of the spectrum of complexity. And for those of you who are familiar with ChatGPT, maybe you were using it since it launched back in late 2022, early 2023. And ChatGPT has access to a basic generative model when it first launched. So those models produce text, code, images, video, now that they're multimodal, based on pre-trained knowledge only. So maybe in the past, these models on the internet had access to some data that was scraped related to economic development, and it could use that to produce a potentially relevant answer to a particular question. But it didn't have access to any external data. It was solely focused on what it was trained on. And the models today still do have training cutoff dates, but they have access to kind of external knowledge. So these are largely being phased out at this point, even though it's only been a couple years since their launch. Most of the more simplified models are no longer actually being put into production by companies. They generally just give you a quick response to a prompt within that particular chatbot interface. What we've seen the emergence of in late 2023, 2024 was these thinking or reasoning models, essentially taking that large language model that sits at the core of these tools and doing some programming on top of it that allows the model to actually break down what the prompt is and turn it into a series of logical steps, or you can think of it as akin to reasoning, but these models don't really reason like humans do. And it allows the models to go through more complex inputs or scenarios. So for ChatGPT users out there, ChatGPT 5 just launched. It does have hybrid reasoning capabilities in its kind of flagship model. And then they actually have a thinking version of ChatGPT 5, which can go into more depth and spend more time to develop a more appropriate response or more well thought out response. Gemini 2.5 Pro also has these capabilities, as well as Claude's most recent model, Claude Opus 4.1, and even some of the other Claude 4 models. These models give you a lengthier response, and you can specify kind of how you want that response to be given back to you. Do you want it in a table? Do you want it as a text output? Then we get into these generative thinking and reasoning models that have retrieval capabilities. And it's kind of a gray area here between these two middle types of tools because most tool providers are now giving you access to retrieval automatically. You don't even know whether it's pulling from its memory or whether it's pulling from the internet to generate its response, unless it's giving you the sources back that it used. So these tools use extended context windows, essentially the amount of text that a particular tool can intake at one point in time, takes those through those multi-step processes, and can ingest external data from the web, or maybe you upload a document to the tool itself in order to derive insights that are grounded in some form of evidence other than just the model's training, which is often not referenced as part of the inference process, getting that answer back from the model. So ChatGPT 5, again, Gemini 2.5 Pro, and for the Google users out there, Notebook LM, which we demoed last time, is another one, and as well as Claude and Perplexity, which I know some folks mentioned they're familiar with, which is taking information from the web. Then you have these more complex generative agentic type tools. These are tools that are using those reasoning models as a foundation to actually go through and execute a series of tasks based on the prompt. And when you hear generative agentic, you can think it as akin to kind of the deep research functionalities that some of these tools have built in. So OpenAI has the ChatGPT plus deep research. Google has the Gemini plus deep research. And Claude has extended thinking, which is not really a selectable feature at this point, but allows you to, when a complex question is input, it will go through a process of extending that. Similarly, Perplexity Labs and Perplexity Deep Research are other tools here. And the difference between these tools and the category above it is that you don't just get out a response from an LLM, you get out essentially a full report from these tools. And when you go to access these tools, for those who aren't super familiar with these, it's actually relatively simple. So all of the model providers at this point are building out user interfaces that are very intuitive, simple to use. The thing to keep in mind is most of them have a model dropdown in the top left corner, or maybe it's next to the speech bar. This is an example of ChatGPT where you can see ChatGPT 5 is the selected model, but you can also select ChatGPT 5 thinking. So if you're doing a more complex task or you want the model to go through more inference as part of that process of giving an answer, you can use that model. Model selection is really important depending on kind of what you're working on. So if you're just developing a summary of something or you're just trying to develop some quick copy, you can use a more basic model. But if you're asking a question related to kind of synthesizing multiple data sources and trying to come up with some benefits and challenges associated with those, it's maybe more beneficial to use one of the more advanced thinking models. And then within the window here, you also see the deep research within the dropdown. It's another selection that you can easily make as you make a query to these tools. Most tools have the same kind of user interface style functionality where you must select the deep research feature in order to actually use that. Then on the right, I have the panel screenshot from Notebook LM where you actually, this user interface is starting to incorporate ways to prompt a tool without actually prompting. They've baked the prompts into a button within the user interface that allows you to, upload all your documents. And then, for example, here you can see you can create a briefing doc from it. You can create a study guide from it. You can create a timeline from it. Mind maps, you can do an audio overview to turn it into kind of a podcast style summary of the information that you've uploaded to Notebook LM. And Marissa, Mike, are there any questions in the chat that I should answer as I'm going through?
Not at this point, Jacob. Thank you
Okay.
for talking.
All right. I'll go through the next few slides relatively quickly so we can get into kind of the demo of these tools, but just wanted to highlight again, different decisions call for different approaches, whether you want to use just a basic reasoning model or a full deep research model. So on the left, you can see maybe a few hundred words worth of a response that came from Claude. And on the right, you can see a deep research output, which is probably a 20-page report that includes citations that came out of Gemini Deep Research. And to get folks excited about what capabilities are coming with AI, these reasoning models are not only good at processing text, but they're also good at processing data. So this is an example screenshot from ChatGPT. This is the paid version of ChatGPT that has kind of some advanced data analysis features, but these tools are better at coding certainly than I am, and give you a capability to actually work through uploading a CSV file and generating insights directly from the data that's within that file. So you can create, you can analyze the data. Maybe you downloaded it from BLS or something like that. And you can also visualize that data. The visualizations, they still have a little bit of work to do to get those looking good, but the fact that the models can write code to actually do data analysis is pretty exciting. And I want to highlight tools are even taking this a step further now. So those of you who are familiar with the free version of Perplexity, if you haven't seen Perplexity Labs, which is a kind of an agentic version of Perplexity that you prompts, and as part of your prompt, you can ask it to actually create something, and it will code that thing that you ask it to create. It will go look for the data, it will analyze the data, and then it can create you, for instance, in this case, a full dashboard summary of the data. And each of the tabs that you see on the screen is actually something that you can click into. This is a live web hosted, it's not live, but it's a web hosted dashboard of the insights that it pulled that you can share with others. I didn't verify any of this information, which is a key piece of what you should do as part of your workflows, but just to highlight what the capabilities are, going from asking a basic question to analyzing data to actually having an AI tool create a dashboard of that data for you. In addition to that, for folks that have paid subscriptions with ChatGPT, you can actually create custom GPTs that can access APIs. So, for instance, if you are already doing data analysis via API access to a particular economic development data source, you can use your existing API key to pull in that data and query it in real time as it is uploaded through that API. And then tools like Claude are starting to give you access to actually make connections to other systems. So you can think of these AI models now as the brain of a larger ecosystem because they can actually talk with other applications. So, for instance, if you downloaded Claude for desktop and you connected it to Chrome, you could ask Claude, just the basic use case that's not necessarily relevant to economic development, but something that they've highlighted. You could say, go to Amazon, search for the best robotic vacuum, and add it to my cart. And it would actually go through that whole process of controlling your browser on your own desktop in order to take the actions necessary to do that. And the last thing that I want to say before we kind of get started with some of the demoing is there are some key challenges that you should be aware of as you use these models for any of these purposes, mainly related to accuracy, bias, and privacy. A lot of the tools are, they're AI, they're doing pattern matching. They don't actually know the answers to the questions you're asking. So you have to be very careful to avoid some of the things like hallucinations that some of you may be familiar with, where they might find some pattern in their training data that's not actually a real fact and portray that back to you. So what a hallucination is. Maybe it's pulling older data from a source that isn't cited within its response. A lot of the tools, if you don't have an enterprise subscription or a specific agreement with the company, the data that you're providing in your prompts or the responses can be used by those companies to train future versions of the models or improve the software, which means they have access to that data. So you should be very careful what you upload. And these models that are doing all of this thinking and reasoning and taking these actions, they were trained on the internet in the first place, which is a sea of biased data. So the models themselves have the bias of that data. They have bias from the folks who built the systems. And it's very important to make sure that you keep a really open perspective as you use these to make sure that the outputs that are coming from these models and the bias that may be associated with it isn't necessarily reflected in whatever you end up using that information for. So I'll pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions before we get started with some of the examples and exercises.
Any questions, folks? All right, Mike, I think we can get started with demos.
Okay, before we start, I was really excited to see we got a lot of responses to the poll when we kicked off. So I am sharing it right now. You confirm you can see the Zoom share screen. Is it, Jacob, is it visible? It is visible.
Yes, I am seeing the poll
So,
response.
One of our hopes for today is to get everybody logging into their respective accounts to whichever AI tool that people use most frequently. to start to prompt some of the questions that we're going to provide. So while you're at it, go ahead and kind of open up your browser, open up your account. But it was interesting to see that ChatGPT is the most frequently used of the AI tools. 20 out of the 22 folks who responded used it. Use is weekly, it's 45%. And I think that roughly falls with about how much I use Gen AI tools. And it's interesting to see sort of the range of comfort using Gen AI tools to answer economic development questions. If I had to self-assess, well, I think I did take the poll, I probably would give myself about a 3 on my own knowledge of Gen AI tools for answering economic development questions. So what I hope today is that we can get some opportunities, and I'll be presenting a few things and sharing some things, but then the goal will also be to start to open up some peer-to-peer discussion and learn about how are you all using Gen AI tools? What are some of these prompts that you're using? And particularly focusing on that diagram that Jacob shared earlier and I'm going to actually pull it up again. The diagram that Jacob had shared earlier, really right now, just focusing on this left side of the screen. Can you see the PowerPoint fine? So really focusing on these questions here around analyzing existing information and synthesizing insights and seeing how we can use, how we're using Gen AI tools and how we can leverage them for economic development purposes. So I'm going to close out the poll. And for those of you who I was able to meet last month, it's very nice to see you all again. I'm Michael Hogan. I'm an economist in our Center for Applied Economics and Strategy, and do this labor market and economic development research day in and day out. Really started trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into some of our workflows. And from our first webinar, I thought I would go back and share a couple of things that I found around Gen AI use for economic development questions. The first is what worked. I found it very useful for compiling and summarizing. It's very quick. It's very good to get a background on a topic, particularly a new one or one you're unfamiliar with. It is helpful to find public sources and references. And as Jacob mentioned, some of those deep research tools can do that better. And then better prompting helps to make answers better. And so often the findings were vague, but specific requests were very helpful. What didn't work? We found sometimes that we were using unverified sources. So verifying data, viewing those original sources helps to give additional context. And often there would be poor writing quality or overly generic output, and sometimes it would fail to follow prompts. As we get into this, I wanted to provide these as some of my initial thoughts on it, but I also want to use it as a way for you all to start thinking about, as you think critically about what you're getting from these Gen AI tools, what works for you. So as we move forward, our goals for today, the first one, if you have an account already, go ahead and log in. We want to run through some of these questions as a group. I want to see what outputs you're getting. How are you seeing their value? What drawbacks are you seeing? What risks are you seeing? If you do not have an account or you haven't used it before, and I saw we had some users who've never used it before. I'll be running through some of the examples in parallel and provide a few observations. So we'll start prompting. We'll review the experience, learn from our peers, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. I feel like my success or failure in doing this has really just come from trying things out and making mistakes, learning what works, learning what doesn't. So just a few objectives and norms for today. I expect that this will be a participatory session, so please come prepared to try out these tools and discuss what you find, and know that we don't have all the answers. And if anything, we may have more questions than we have answers right now, and I think that's okay. I'll be using the ChatGPT free version. I do not have a pro account right now. My account lapsed, but GPT-5 just came out last week, so we're kind of figuring out what that means. If there's another one that you use more often, feel free to ask it the same questions, and just know there are a lot of tools out there. And then we're going to provide some prompts and then hand them off to you to conduct your own queries. So the goal, and we have as many as 3, will be to kind of share the prompt in question, run it, review the results, and then discuss. So I think for today, we can have a mix of, and Marissa, I'm kind of looking to you to help, facilitate a little bit with the feedback, but for folks to come off mute, raise hands, and allow, if they're more comfortable, sharing things in the chat, but to allow for everybody to share what they're seeing, share what they're learning. I think that the value in this session is going to come from a lot of that, just seeing how everyone else is using these tools. So what I've done is I brought up 3 kind of prompts, and I want to get kind of thinking about 3 ways of thinking about our session. So first is around just the labor market info. We want to understand the size of the sector, what are the trends, understand what some of those risks are, and why not ask a better question. There's no better question than what are the risks of AI on our region's economy in the next 5 years, and what can we do about it? Kind of funny to ask AI that question. Understanding some of those important innovation assets in your region and creating those inventories, which can often be a really valuable component of understanding what those assets are. So I want to start, and I'm going to use, again, I'm based in North Carolina, and been doing some work recently in cybersecurity. And so I've been using this as a tool to say, hey, how many people work in cybersecurity in North Carolina? What are the top occupations? Who are the primary employers? So I want you all to do is log into your preferred Gen AI tool of choice. Think about the region that you're in, the state that you're in, and some of those industries that either you're working in or you're interested in, and start to prompt these questions into there. Read through the responses and let me know what you think. So I'm going to shift over. I believe you should be able to see my window and start with something as simple as how many people work in cybersecurity.
Mike, just a quick note that we're still seeing your PowerPoint.
I'm really not good at this, am I? I'm going to take my screen share down and set myself up again. Are you seeing my ChatGPT screen now?
We are. Yes, thank
All
you.
right. So for you all, I think starting to ask this question: how many people work in cybersecurity in North Carolina? And as we move through, we start to see some stats, understand where this data is coming from, getting some of this data, open demand. And again, I provided very little context here about what we wanted to do here. So we start pulling data around total workforce, total professionals, different sources coming from Business Journal, from the Department of Information Technology. And then it starts to ask, okay, final takeaway, there are roughly 43,000 cybersecurity professionals, available job openings, pretty high right now. And so it gives you a couple of new questions to come to. So I'm going to start to ask, what are the most and as we start to search, we see data from the BLS starting to show up, that Department of Labor, different sources starting to come together. We're seeing them from NC State, from I've never heard of this organization, Cyber Degrees. We start to see some of the demand and the roles shaping the future. We start to see it built out by metro area. We see community input from Reddit, which has its own risks and challenges. A summary table around some of these different roles and specializations. Starting to see a final takeaway. And I would be interested in knowing what are the workforce development programs. What are workforce development programs? And as we move down, we see North Carolina Partnership, NC State, North Carolina Central, NCA&T, NCDIT, NIST funded R Triad Enterprises. And if you look at some of the sources, there are some sources that are better than others. We're seeing stuff from NC State. We're also seeing things from sources like Wikipedia or Reddit that can have a little more unverified information that may be a little bit harder to track. So I want to pause right now and I want to ask folks who are on the call, and as you've been working through some of these questions, what are you seeing? What are you finding surprising? What are you finding useful or potentially concerning?
Mike,
Happy to-
I'll jump
Yeah,
in
Sarah, go ahead.
super quick. I thought it was super interesting. I did my hometown and it directed me, it just kind of gave vague numbers and then it said around auto manufacturing and then it said you should really check with your local economic development office to verify this information. So I thought that was interesting, but I'm on an RTI chat, an RTI AI tool. I want to know what our friends in Florida with I see that big gator back there as a UGA person, but I love that y'all are doing this. I don't want to I am putting you on the spot, and I think I saw Pearl come off camera as well, but I would love to hear what you all are learning.
We did how many biotech jobs are in Alachua County, and it reported 1,400 to 1,500, which is dated information. It missed two company contraction. Like we had layoffs in 2022 and 2023 around AAV vectors, and it missed that complete narrative.
Oh wow.
By media, but we were using ChatGPT 5.
Oh wow. Okay. Yvonne, I see you're ready to go.
Sarah, I'm always ready to go.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things I did, I was talking to Tammy about this. She's sitting right next to me, is that typically what I do with ChatGPT or any of these is I'll take a broad question like Michael proposed about the risk to our local economy, which would be for Orlando in our context. And I ask it, what's the best prompt I can ask you to ask me to tell you what it is you're gonna do. And so it gave me a very detailed prompt on the risks and be specific on this and act as an economic strategist, blah, blah, blah. And then it gave me a very detailed report. So typically when I'm unsure, I just ask ChatGPT to feed me the best prompt, and then it will tell me. And then that's what I did. And so we were going back and forth like, oh, did you know about that? Oh, let's talk about that. And so it was good.
Awesome. I saw Vincent was giving a thumbs up on that as well. Hey, Sperry, are you?
Hey. I'll go ahead and say, I did a lot of these things, of course, for North Carolina and life sciences. And, it's just like Michael said in the first session that we had, they just regurgitated a single report. And so all of the answers are exactly what I'd expect if I had just read the executive summary of the taxonomy report.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Maybe give it a few years. What do you say, Jacob or Pearl? You have something to add?
Well, I was just gonna, because I'm pretty sure me and Sperry looked up the same stuff. And I was actually it was basically word for word what our website says or what the NC Biotech Taxonomy report says, like literally exactly. But I was excited that it was citing like NC Biotech and it was saying like, here's the taxonomy report to look at and here's websites for these training programs. So I think the fact that it was like going in and saying, here's where you can learn more about this program. I know we've got Vincent and Rondra from BioNetwork on the call for North Carolina folks. Like that was their first thing that popped up for training. So I was impressed by that. I think on the other end, when I was asking about high growth occupations, the answer I got was like healthcare related positions, computer and mathematical occupations. And so I had to go back and be like, I need you to be more specific because that's way too big to mean anything. So I think that would be the bad side, but I was excited that I felt like it was relevant sources and legitimate sources that were being cited.
You you know if you ask it more, I would say specific questions. I think all those questions were very conversational prompts.
Yep.
But if you asked it, what would biotech be like, say maybe in the year 2030, then you get a more deep dive of what would be happening. Because yeah, you're right. It's going to get pretty much about North Carolina. I think NC Biotech is probably the big informational source, so it's going to pull from that. But those deep dive questions, I think Chat GPT and Gemini, I found to tend to come up with some pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I would add maybe two things here. One, I'll build on what you noted, Vincent, that, these models, as much as you would love to think that they think like we do, really all they're doing is pattern matching. So you put in a string of words, those words get converted to numbers, and then those numbers go through this massive trillion parameter model and match some information in there, and it spits out a response. So if you put in a very simple prompt, whatever that prompt matches to in the knowledge is going to come out the other side as what the answer is that's most relevant to that string. But the more specific you get with your prompts, the more matching that has to occur within that massive neural network within these models. And so you can actually get much more robust answers, not only from the model's training data, but from the model actually pulling in information from the external world in order to bring that into what the answer might be. And I would say if anyone is getting responses that they feel don't go in depth enough, they aren't providing enough sources to give you the confidence that you would like in your answer, to try Gemini Deep Research. I am a huge fan of Gemini Deep Research. It's one of my go-tos for A, getting up the curve on a particular topic, but B, you can ask it a very specific question and it will break down the research plan, tell you what it's going to do. You can tweak it if there's something that seems off, and then you will get a full 20-page report that you can download that has actual like super scripted citations throughout from exactly where the information came from. So it's another level deeper if you're really wanting well-referenced information. Will the information be exactly what you're looking for? It's hard to say, but you'll at least know where it came from and you'll get a much more robust response out of the tool.
So based on I believe Vincent queuing this up, I decided to ask that specific question can you give me a forward-looking view of what will cybersecurity look like in 2030 and how will it change in the next 5 years? I sense we have a little bit of a North Carolina bias on this call, which is okay. But we'll get some insight from our other states as well. And so starting to see that, how will some of these new AI tools, what will their impact be? And this focuses heavily on the technology, but it provides some good sources. And in the past, I had worked and gone in and used the deep research function. With a free version, you do have a limited number of deep research deep research prompts, but it is starting to do a better job of providing some of those sources and where things are coming from. But again, there's a big reliance on things like Wikipedia that can be a little bit of a risk. So I want to shift gears here because I think I'm loving the conversation. Gotta give one more opportunity to prompt something different. So stepping back, I want to prompt one more question. We'll talk about industry risks and trends. And I figured why not ask about AI? So the question is, what are the biggest risks to our state, our region, economy in the next 5 years? And how will the adoption of AI affect the workforce and future economic growth? I think we've gotten a lot of North Carolina. So I think that I'm going to say we're going to switch to Tennessee. So starting to see some of these, I can't believe they gave us a TLDR, but big picture outcomes about growth in the major metro areas, more job churn from AI, public sector impact, starting to see where are some of these assets? What are some of the impacts? What are some of the risks? Things like facilities, uneven benefits, workforce mismatch. Starting to see what some of these practical outcomes can be. But it's kind of incredible the degree to which it starts to go into actions and these next prompting steps. Can you draft a one-page policy brief for the governor or county economic development director? So let's try that. So asking ChatGPT to go ahead and draft that one-pager executive summary, starting to bring together some KPIs, infrastructure planning, et cetera. It's pretty incredible how quickly and the degree to which you can do this. I want to step back and ask the same question. When it comes to how you all are using these tools, how do you use those follow-up tools? And have you been using some of these queries around create that one-page policy brief? And how do you evaluate the quality of those outputs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. I think I put that same question in the chat just now, even before you asked verbally. And I've found that oftentimes some of the prompts get me thinking deeper about the question and what I could follow up asking. Like sometimes I don't even understand that the tool can do some of the things it's prompting me for. So I was just curious if others have had a similar experience, or to your point, the value and the accuracy of some of those prompts.
So this is Tammy from the Orlando Economic Partnership, and I'd say, from my experience, I typically do the research first and then check in AI to see, kind of, Marissa, similar to what you've been doing, check then in AI to see if there's any avenue or anything that I may have overlooked. So not so much depending on it to do the major work, but more of the improvement, icing on the cake work.
I'll sometimes start, and then when it starts to get to be like AI speak, I hit a wall and then I stop because I'm like, this is silly. And then go back and refine and like what stood out, what didn't, what's completely missing, as our friends in Florida said, and then work it myself, and then go back and do follow up with the prompts, because sometimes when the prompts start to, they don't run wild, but when they start going into directions that I know, it's interesting, and then it's like, this isn't useful to the larger question I'm trying to answer here, or the smaller question. So let me just stop a second, look at the patterns, look at what I'm finding, maybe refer to some things, and then go back again.
I have
Also,
a kind
like
of
some, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a like kind of follow-up question to this. Is how often are you all starting with a set of data and uploading a particular document, as opposed to just relying on the AI to do the research? Have you stemmed from a knowledge base that you already have and kind of try to expand upon that? See some thumbs up and some head nods there.
Yeah, Jacob, I'll jump in. I think I frequently use it for like content creation or ideas. And so it'll be, here's a web page that is relevant. Can you, using my voice, draft a post that would look like this? And then we'll provide the feedback of like, well, here's how I rewrote it, or here's what my changes were, so that then those edits are included the next time I ask for something. But I think I most frequently use AI to say, hey, here's this source, or here's this information. My head of AI policy is on the call. Here's this information that is like broadly accessible and publicly available, that you then, can you summarize it for me, or can you make it compelling in this way, explain it to this group? I very rarely am like, can you find this information for me without any background knowledge?
Chat GPT tends to be very chatty, and Gemini tends to be, if you had a personality attached to it, Gemini tends to be like an advisor. It's like, if you want a friend, Chat GPT is probably the best one to go to if you want to have a friend. But Gemini is going to be more like an advisor to you. I remember I was doing some research on a product marketing for someone, and I wanted to know why compressors are so small. Gemini gave me a better, deeper understanding of the engineering behind these very small compressors that you find, like the ones that are advertising on TikTok all the time, like it'll blow your car tire, and the thing is only like maybe 6 inches by maybe 3 inches. And it gave me all the detailed understanding of the engineering behind why those compressors are that way. And you can also extract good business models from Gemini. I have found that out to be very true.
Yeah, I would say, if you think about the background of the companies that are developing the tools, it gives you some insights into what they're best suited for. Google has long been the leader in web search, and They can find information. You know, we switched from saying I'm going to go search for this to I'm going to Google this. So when you think about trying to get information from an external source, Google is certainly really good. But OpenAI with ChatGPT, they were solely focused on model development from the very beginning, and they've developed a model that is really great at keeping you engaged in a particular conversation that you're having.
So knowing that we've just got a couple more minutes left, I wanted to close out with just a couple of broad questions and see if folks wanted to share anything else. And specifically, a couple of broader questions that I have, you know, based on doing this work is, where is this useful? And I think we've started to talk through that. What is your impression of the outputs and the responses? But also, what sources are being used in your analysis as you're looking through these, you're seeing the sources. We saw Reddit, we saw Wikipedia, we saw some new platforms that were maybe unverified or that we had never heard of before. But what's missing? And then what are some risks or some drawbacks? And I want to learn a little bit from your experiences about potential missing pieces, what you see are missing, and what are some of the risks and some of the issues that you see moving forward with Gen AI being used for economic development topics.
I wanted to go back to a comment Sperry made earlier about, how the prompt, she got the response from all the content that she already knew or that was already on the Biotech Center's website. And I'm curious what others think in terms of how long will it take for AI for that not to be the case? Like, will it take 2 months before Sperry gets the like more, I will just say more dynamic or more multi-sourced information? I know we don't know a real answer, but for those of you who think and work in this much more regularly, I'm just curious what we think about timelines because I just thought it was a great point, Sperry. Where it might not be perfect, but you get a much more kind of robust data points, if you will, or just resources to help inform, what you were looking up. Jacob, do you know the answer? You have this very, you have this background of like, this brain with all these lights. So I just figured you might have some insights for us.
Yeah, so I would say the reasoning models are already trying to take some of the pressure of prompt engineering off of the tool users, because they actually take your original prompts and they transform it into something that's more likely to get a more robust response out. So like ChatGPT 5 is hybrid reasoning. Claude's most recent models are hybrid reasoning. So even with the simple prompts, you can get a better response than you would have 6 months ago. And I would say we're on a trajectory where, and I don't know when ChatGPT 6 is going to be launched, but it wasn't very long in between GPT 4.0 and 5. It was less than a year. So that, in combination with the improvement of deep research tools and the capability of these tools to actually be quickly customized. So instead of using a user interface, for instance, one of you, if you got really excited in your spare time, could actually go ask ChatGPT, how could I create the best economic development app, and connect it to all of these APIs that have the data that is most relevant to me. And it could give you the step-by-step in the most basic, simple terms to walk you through how to actually create your own application to do a more strategic search. And we're already there. I'm not a software engineer. I'm a chemist by training, and I can create my own applications, write my own code. And 6 months ago, I had never done anything like that. So the more you experiment, the more you'll be able to find creative solutions to those types of problems. But the model providers are very well aware that to increase adoption, you have to continue to take pressure off of the consumers or the users in this case to get good responses out. So it's happening really fast.
I also just wanted to point out, Sandra in the chat brought up, I think, a really good gap and a challenge as we think about the use of AI tools for economic development, is a real focus on a lot of data and resources available for our big metro areas and our big companies. And Sandra, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else to that, but I just think it's a really, really good point to bring up, that there are going to be gaps in the knowledge because, as Marquise said, they are driven by the way that they're designed and feeding in data where there's already lots of data available. Sandra, did you want to add anything else as we close out?
I think for me, the frustration and the lack of using AI for research is because our region, our economic region, is like over 73% small businesses. And so for me today, my prompt was around aerospace companies, and I know the companies that exist that participate within that economy, and none of that data showed. One of the companies that actually showed that was small was acquired by a large corporation like 8 years ago. So for me to see that company pop up, I was like, this is not helpful for me. It just makes me not trust the data at all. And so for me, it's like, why would I spend time doing this instead of just researching to get the appropriate information?
Yep. As the Florida group pointed out as well, and they found, there was a company on their list that had closed. So there are some risks, and I think keeping these things in mind, and I know we're at time, we could probably talk about this for another hour, but keeping that in mind, knowing the limitations and risks of some of these tools will be important context as we move forward. I want to thank everybody. Marissa, I'll let you close out. But thanks everyone for joining today.
Yeah, thank you, Mike and Jacob. I think we all really appreciate your vast knowledge and facilitation abilities. So thank you so much for walking us through these tools. And folks, just take a look in the chat and register for the next session. We look forward to it. Bye-bye.